Good evening. My name is Nancy Keegan-Smith, and I'm president of the First Ladies Association for Research and Education. I'm very excited about tonight's program because I love flowers and particularly orchids. Welcome to FLAIR's program on the fascinating topic of First Ladies and their Orchids, a Century of Namesake Cattleyas. Our program will feature a conversation with FLAIR moderator Valerie Palmer-Mehta, professor of communication at Oakland University, and more importantly, an avid gardener, and Arthur Chadwick, the author, along with his father, of the book First Ladies and Their Orchids, a Century of Namesake Cattleyas. Of course, in addition to being an author, Art is an expert orchid grower and has several greenhouses and retail establishments. FLAIR has some innovative programming and events coming up for 2025, so please watch our webpage, flair-net.org, for announcements and events that are coming up. We just released a new FLOTUS podcast on Dolly Madison, her life and letters, which is very, very interesting, and I highly encourage you to listen to it. And it's done with Holly Schulman, the head of the Dolly Madison Project at UVA, and our wonderful moderator, Alan Lowe. I want to thank our lifetime institutional members and all of our FLAIR individual members. I am very excited tonight to welcome our newest lifetime institutional member, who is Mount Montpelier. And we have just come back from visiting them, and Montpelier is a beautiful place. Our collaborative projects with institutional members and individual members are illustrative of the key relationships that FLAIR forms to fulfill its important mission about the impact and lasting legacies of U.S. First Ladies and promoting research and education on them. It is now my pleasure to turn the program over to our moderator, Valerie Palmer-Mehta, for what I know will be a fascinating program with some lovely slides.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I'm so happy to be here tonight, and I'm delighted to welcome Art Chadwick. Thank you for being here tonight. I am so happy to talk about two wonderful subjects, First Ladies and Flowers, with an emphasis on the Cattleya orchid. And I want you to know that I had the privilege of obtaining your wonderful book, your second book, co-authored with your father, Arthur Andrew. And it's titled First Ladies and Their Orchids, a Century of Namesake Cattleyas. The book is absolutely stunning. Now, Art, I have to admit something to you. I have a terrible habit of writing in all of my books. And I was about to write in your book and I pulled myself back. I just couldn't do it. It was just too beautiful. I could not desecrate this gorgeous book with any of my writing. I appreciate not just the history of First Ladies and their namesake orchids, but also the lineage of the hybrids and the fascinating stories of celebrated growers from around the world that played really key roles in their cultivation. The photographs, they're magnificent too. And I loved how you included correspondence from First Ladies. There are notes from Barbara Bush and Laura Bush and Rosalind Carter, as well as Melania Trump. Just really wonderful. And I noticed in the dedication of the book, you shared a really charming story of how your father developed a lifelong passion for orchids. He even served as the feature writer for the American Orchid Society for 50 years. Would you mind sharing with us what sparked and maintained his interest in orchids?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me, and thank you everyone for watching this. My father grew up at a time when corsages were in fashion. So the 1930s, 40s, 50s, 60s, about a 40-year run they had where Cattleya corsages were worn everywhere. It was just what you did. You were underdressed if you didn't wear an orchid. So this is how he grew up. It was all about the glamour. And as he walked home from school as a teenager, he went past an old estate outside Philadelphia, and they had greenhouses. And the grower would throw his extra plants in a pile, essentially composting them because you couldn't keep them all. Well, my father would pick up one every day and take it home to his parents and say, "Mom, look what I found." Then the next day, "Mom, look what I found." Or before long, his parents had to build him a greenhouse. And when he passed away just a few years ago, he had many of those original plants that he'd collected as a teenager.
Wow. That's awesome. I just found the story in the book just really heartwarming. And I also thought it was interesting that you have cultivated, to use a little garden metaphor, an interest in orchids too. You have this diverse background. You hold a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering. You also have an MBA. And these qualifications are not usually linked, in my mind, to horticulture or orchid cultivation. Could you share how your own passion developed through time?
Well, having grown up with orchids with my father, that's the last thing I wanted to do when I grew up, because you want to break away and do your own thing. So I was into model trains, and I became an electrical engineer in corporate America for 5 years. It's a perfectly lovely career, and all my friends are still doing it. But one day I thought, Dad, tell me about those orchids again. So we founded this company in 1989, Chadwick and Son Orchids. I'm the son. And I quit cold turkey, and I've never looked back.
Oh, that's awesome. I love how you reconnected into this passion, really. So in your book, you mentioned that your start with the naming cattleyas after first ladies was met with a little bit of resistance from your father. Could you talk about, what spurred that interest and how he responded and how you navigated all of that?
Well, first of all, the naming of cattleya hybrids after prominent women began in Europe with the English baronesses and queens and princesses. That was in the late 1800s. And as you know, the United States doesn't have royalty. We have first ladies. So it started picking up here in the United States in the 1920s, where growers would name the incoming first lady with a namesake hybrid. Well, this was big long before I was even born. And I was reading about it in my father's library. I read all his old orchid magazines. He kept them all. And here's Mamie Eisenhower with her orchid. Here's Bess Truman with her orchid. Gee, Dad, what is it about these first ladies and orchids? Oh, yes, that was a big thing back in the day of corsages. Growers would fight to be the first one to name one after the first lady. But now that corsages are no longer in fashion, the tradition of naming cattleyas after first ladies sort of has died away. And I thought, well, that's a shame. Why don't we pick that up? And of course, he resisted. Oh, balderdash. You don't want to mix business and politics. That's the end of the road. But I had to explain to him, this is a legacy that goes back decades and that it's worth picking up. It's a continuum. So he fought it, and I kind of overrode it, and I started naming them. And then when they really started gaining traction and I was getting calls from the White House, he said, okay, that was a good idea after all.
Yeah, I just love that. Because you mentioned, he was a little worried, getting into the realm of politics with flowers. I don't know if those go together, but you created like the perfect match, and resurrecting the tradition is such a great idea. It's really wonderful. Helps you
both parties, both the Republicans, Democrats, everyone's represented, and First Lady gets one. It's just what's done, and it's not political at all.
Absolutely. Yeah. So you mentioned in your book that your first attempt at presenting an orchid to a first lady didn't exactly go as you had planned. Would you mind sharing a little bit of that rich history? I thought it was just great.
Is this with Hillary?
Yes.
Yes. So this was my first attempt. I had no idea what I was doing. But, it was 1993, and we had this amazing semi-alba, white with a pinky purple throat in bloom, and it got this big award at an Orchid Society show. I said, gosh, here's something that we should name after someone, because it was an unnamed hybrid, and it had this big award. So that's when I proposed to my dad, hey, how about the current First Lady, Mrs. Clinton? Oh, absolutely not. But I persevered, and so I named it. But that's just the tiniest first step in getting it to Mrs. Clinton. I mean, long line of hoops had to be jumped through. I started out just writing letters as a common, person. Hi, I'm a resident of Virginia and I have an orchid for you. Well, of course, thank you very much. I'm busy. So then I went through, several other attempts, and I even went through a Republican senator who was big into orchids, and he was rejected also because, it was the wrong party. So I was like, gosh, this is like really a puzzle you have to navigate. So Don Beyer, who was the lieutenant governor at the time, I talked to him. He said, oh yeah, I just talked to Mrs. Clinton yesterday. I'll get this taken care of for you. So sure enough, he sent a letter. She accepted it. Here, I'll see you next Tuesday. And so I went up and presented it. It was smooth as silk, but you really have to know how to walk the line.
Yeah, for sure. And then this photo here is a picture of you with Hillary Clinton, and this is her namesake orchid.
Yeah, it's a stunner. If
it is.
Find up 100 semi-albas was what they call this color combination. Find up 100 on the table. Hers would just jump out at you. The color of the lip is just one of a kind. It just glows.
Absolutely. I mean, honestly, it is absolutely gorgeous. I just love it. The detail, it's just so beautiful. So you mentioned a little bit that goes into the presentation, right? With, trying to get involved. Is there kind of like a process that you follow? Because now you're an old pro, you've done this. In reading the book, especially with Jill Biden, I'm going to ask you some questions about her in a minute, but it seems like a fairly elaborate process, and that your orchids have to go under, security screening and all this. Can you give us a little bird's eye view about what it's like to put on these presentations, a little more backstory too?
Well, there's a reason why everyone doesn't do this. It's this monumental task. Because first of all, cattleya orchids are very seasonal. They last for about 1 month, and they're really only super fresh for maybe 2 weeks. So you've got a 2-week window where the orchid's timing has to be in line with her timing. Well, gosh, she's got a lot more important things to do than accept flowers. She's in another country. She's here, there, at a moment's notice. She's at a head of state funeral, blah, blah, blah. So you can go years of trying before the two timings line up.
Yeah, I bet. I give you a lot of credit for your patient perseverance in making all this happen.
Well, I think orchid growers are inherently patient because first of all, they take 7 years to bloom from seed, and then they bloom once a year after that, but just for, maybe a month, and it might skip a year or 2 or 3, and you have to hang in there and wait till it finally comes back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's actually really good for cultivating patience itself. So are there any specific attributes that are incorporated into the namesake orchids that take into account particular preferences or qualities of the First Lady, or even the elements of the plant itself? Well,
that's a good question. As a breeder, I want to select a hybrid that is particularly nice. Maybe it's very long lasting. Maybe it's very colorful. It's fragrant. It's got some really wow features. And I set that aside for, an upcoming moment, like a First Lady. And so let's say before my time, Nancy Reagan's hybrid was named, and the grower picked a reddish purple hybrid because she likes red. Mm-hmm. And so growers try to match the hybrid to the First Lady. With Jill Biden, she's blonde, so I picked a yellow orchid. I mean, it's not like you get this long discussion with the First Lady. What about this one? What about this one? You pretty much have to pick one and run with it and just hope they like it.
And you gave us this picture of Nancy Reagan here. Do you want to describe a little bit about this picture and kind of maybe the background or something?
These are not cattleya orchids. These are dendrobium orchids. But that's all we have. We don't have a picture of her with her namesake hybrid. Mm-hmm. So this presentation was made at the Singapore Botanical Gardens in the 1980s. And it's absolutely stunning. They honored her, an incoming First Lady, with this hybrid they named after her. So she posed for it, and she was thrilled and all that. And that's a perfectly lovely orchid. But the orchids I do are the cattleyas. These are the big showy ones that you wear. And they're just as lovely. It's just a different style.
Yeah, I love that there are so many different varieties and types. I think it's just a lot of fun. So who was the first grower to cultivate and name an orchid for a first lady? How did this tradition begin? And did that grower make a presentation like you do?
That would have been 1929. Mrs. Herbert Hoover, Lou Hoover. The hybrid was called Mrs. Herbert Hoover, but she was Lou Hoover. But Joseph Manda in New Jersey, he's now out of business, of course, but he named the hybrid after her. And then the stock market crashed. So we don't even know if it was ever presented or if she knew about it. But he registered the hybrid and it became it was in the books. And then other first ladies were named. And then you started to see a continuum. Oh, other first ladies have been done. Who's missing? So we noticed Mrs. Roosevelt, of all people, was missing. Her husband had 4 Cattleyas named after him. She had none. We went back and retroactively named one after her. And although she doesn't have any surviving children, she has a number of grandchildren. And we located her granddaughter, Anna, who is president of the Goodwill of Maine. And we named this orchid and we sent it to her. And she had to send orchids to all the Roosevelt relatives all around the country.
Mm-hmm. It's fabulous. You want to tell us a little bit about this picture?
Well, this is a picture of 2 first ladies, Bess Truman and Eleanor Roosevelt. They're both wearing corsages. It's black and white. It just has all the charm of, the old days. Mm-hmm. And, she was a big Cattleya person. She didn't wear them too much as first lady because she didn't want to show extravagance at a time when the country was in a depression. But she certainly wore them after she left office. And up until her death, she wore them everywhere.
Well, that's such a great photo. It's just really nice. And speaking of photos, I mentioned that the photos in your book are just magnificent. And on page 268, I never do this because I don't think people should be like, look at this on here, but I just have to do it. On 268 of your book, you showcase the names of the first ladies alongside the image of the orchids named in their honor. It's truly a beautiful presentation. I absolutely love it. And for our audience, could you share how many orchids have been created for first ladies and how many you personally have cultivated?
Well, there have been 19 consecutive first ladies that have had namesake hybrids, starting with Mrs. Woodrow Wilson all the way through today. We've named the past 6 and a number of retroactive ones, including Mrs. Wilson. Back in her day, the husband's got all the glory. He had 3 or 4 orchids named after him, and she had none also. And we just thought that was completely unfair. So we worked with the Wilson Foundation out of Wytheville, the Edith Wilson Foundation, and we developed this hybrid for her. This is one my father bred. It took 7 years to breed. It's a summer blooming dark purple with a wonderful fragrance. And it's something that Mrs. Wilson would have worn back in the day. And that you can see that black and white picture. She was the first lady to really wear them publicly everywhere. Here she is at the World Series, and she's wearing 4 on her lapel. Can you imagine wearing 4 enormous flowers?
Yeah, it's just remarkable. And this is just an absolutely gorgeous orchid, just so beautiful. So in chapter 19 of your book, you have a great discussion about First Lady Dr. Jill Biden's namesake orchid. I loved every bit of it. Could you give some of the highlights of that situation, including maybe some detail about the experience that occurred when Joe Biden was vice president and then president? And I'm thinking about an airplane here and an orchid getting a ride. Maybe you can share that with our audience.
Well, she's from my home state of Delaware, where I was raised, Wilmington, Delaware. I mean, she shops at the same grocery store I do. And they've been around for forever. And so it just seemed like a natural fit. Oh, let's name an orchid before she's even first lady, back when she was second lady. So we actually made a number of attempts to present them. And we couldn't seem to pin her down, whatnot. But he was around. So he accepted, one of my clients presented it to him. And he flew it back on Air Force Two, back to Washington and back to Delaware. So she saw it that way. And we thought maybe that's all that we'd ever get. But then when she became first lady, we said, well, let's do this officially. Let's go through the office of the first lady. So we wrote a letter, we had recommendations, blah, blah, blah. And this time, after we've done so many of these, they're asking, well, how does this orchid thing work anyway, Mr. Chadwick? So it was nice to be, sort of in control for once. And when her schedule allowed, I actually had 2 of her namesakes in bloom at the same time, probably 20 or 30 in all that bloom at different times, but I had 2 in bloom at once. So I took them both up there. They were both fresh, and they varied a little bit. One had a purple throat, one had a yellow throat. And so we had something to talk about in terms of the genetic variation that occurs with seeds. She said, oh, perfect. I'll put one on my desk and I'll put the purple one on Joe's desk. And so for that one moment in time, I had an orchid on both the First Lady and the President's desk.
That's just remarkable. And on Air Force Two. It's probably the only orchid to get a ride on Air Force Two.
First.
It's just remarkable, just wonderful. It's just a great part of the history of our nation. Your orchids are part of the history of our nation.
We always donate one of everything to the Smithsonian Gardens, where they're on public display when they bloom. And they're often paired with the First Lady's dresses. So it makes a wonderful public display.
Yeah, that's just outstanding. And as if it couldn't get any better than that, I understand that you had an exhibit at the 2025 Royal Horticultural Society Chelsea Flower Show. The exhibit, awesome, huh? The exhibit provided a history of the Cattleya orchid genus from the 1800s to the present.
Yes.
And I also understand that the exhibit won a silver gilt medal in the floral division for an orchid hybrid that you named after Queen Camilla, and you showed Her Majesty the hybrid during her visit to the exhibit.
That's true. Here is the silver gilt medal. It's unheard of for a United States grower to do an orchid exhibit in another country, let alone another continent. You can't even transport orchids across over the ocean. There's all these endangered species laws, and the paperwork is unbelievable. So all we could do was borrow orchids once we got there. But we had the whole exhibit designed in the United States by an architecture firm. And then we had it built by a contractor. And then we flew in and added all the touches, the tropical plants and these glass boxes, which held these mementos from the 1800s, the original silver trophies from the early Chelsea Flower Show days, the original royal warrants from Queen Victoria and George V, and the original Reichenbachia botanical print books from the 1890s. And then we had them in these glass boxes, so it gave a museum quality to the exhibit. And the judges really responded. They hadn't seen anything like that in any of the Chelsea shows. And they gave it this big medal. We weren't trying to get any medals. We didn't even know there were medals. We were just trying to make a respectable exhibition. And the last part of our exhibit was all the royal hybrids that had been made in the past and all the royal hybrids that we have made. We've done Queen Camilla, we've done Diana, Princess Kate, Queen Elizabeth II, a long line of them. My ancestors are English, so we thought this is appropriate. And so we were really hoping that one of the royals would come to the show during opening day. It's called press day. And toward the end of the day, everybody leaves the show and the royals come in. It's a private viewing. And we're just hoping they come to our orchid booth because we're only one of 87 in the Great Pavilion. And sure enough, here comes Queen Camilla with their entourage right down Orchid Lane. And we were the first one she came to and went straight to us. And I was able to show her this big photograph of the hybrid we named after her. It's a fall bloomer, so we couldn't show it to her live, but she just loved the picture and was really, really appreciative.
That's just remarkable. That has to be like the apex, right, of a person's career to have all of those things converge at one time. I mean, you've done many, many remarkable things, really wonderful things to be proud of, but this is just really sort of the icing on the cake.
Well, it's really the orchids that do all the work. Everybody loves orchids. You show up with orchids and you're in. So really, I'm just sort of helping things along.
That's awesome. And there's a picture, in your book, you have other notable women and their orchids, and we see Margaret Thatcher in there too.
Yes. She's happened so long ago that we didn't really think it was a political statement at the Chelsea show, but there were several, onlookers that took issue with that picture.
Aw.
And, it's just about the flowers. It's not the party. We don't really follow English politics. And I think they understood.
Yes, it's just about the flower, right?
Yep.
We're just trying to enjoy and connect people with flowers, and I think it's all fantastic. Okay,
Let me show you this little book here. This is one of the books that we had in our Chelsea exhibit. It's called The Orchid Hunter. It's from the late 1800s, and it's one of the Victorian novels about how the orchids were discovered. And that's the kind of stuff I read at night. Just the excitement of it all, seeing that orchid in the tree that has never been seen before, by Westerners. And of course, now you take a picture of it, but back then you would wiggle a piece off and send it to Kew Gardens and have it identified. And yes, this is a brand new flower, never seen before. What would you like to name it? Well, I can name it after my dog. I can name it after my mother. Most explorers name it after themselves, but then that becomes the name of the orchid forever. And it's just amazing how the species all started out in the wild.
Isn't it? I mean, can you imagine being the person who discovers the first orchid?
Right.
How remarkable.
Right. And so many explorers never made it back. They love the idea of going into the jungles, and pulling things out. Well, the snake got them on day one, or the Aborigines ate them. There were actually cannibals that would eat people. Mm-hmm. And, you're walking on our turf. We'll have you for dinner. Mm-hmm. And all these diseases. And, maybe a tenth of the explorers actually came back alive.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, you have so much great insight and knowledge. I bet that our viewers have some questions for you. So I'm going to encourage people to start throwing some questions in the chat while we're still talking. And you can see in the background here that I have a little orchid. See my orchid? And my little phalaenopsis. Don't judge me.
That's adorable.
But orchids are the #1 house plant and have been for some time.
Decades.
So tell us, what's changed over the years, and what's been the most frequent question that you have had over orchid care? I mean, I could ask you a bunch of questions, but I won't do that to our audience today.
Well, I'm in love with the cattleya orchids. But the orchids you see today are the Phalaenopsis orchids. You see them in grocery stores. That's how common they are. So that's where people get started today. They see one, they grab it, and that becomes their first orchid. But back in my father's day, the cattleya was the orchid that everyone knew about. And they've always been the #1 orchid, #1 plant in people's minds. It's the most glamorous, no matter if it's a cut flower, if it's a potted plant, whatever form it takes, it's always been the premier flower.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Is that why they were picked for first ladies? Because they are like, you can't really put a tiny Phalaenopsis probably on it doesn't really pop as a corsage.
You could use them. They're often used as boutonnieres today, or wristlets. But you certainly can't get the grandeur of the Mrs. Wilson 4 on your lapel effect from a Phalaenopsis. Yeah.
And before we get to Jeff Youngquist's awesome question there, do you have a particular question that people always ask you about orchid care?
Yes. The #1 question I get, it's so ridiculous. I put 3 ice cubes on my orchid and it died. What happened? Well, first of all, orchids are tropical plants. The last thing they want is anything cold in their vicinity, whether it's water, ice, air. They're tropical. They like it warm, hot and sticky. They're from the jungles. We actually preheat our well water before we apply it to our plants. So they get to be 75, 80 degree, a balmy shower. So we say, drop the ice cubes, go with nice warm water, and you'll see a big improvement in your plant's health.
Just imagine how many orchids you've saved today with that one piece of advice.
I know. And all the orchid growers around the country are doing the same thing as I am.
Yes, that they do recommend that. That's the sad thing. If you Google it, people give that terrible advice.
Right. Yeah.
So Jeff Youngquist says, love this topic. Thanks, Art and Val, for having this conversation. Have any of the first ladies you presented to had a passion for gardening or maybe growing orchids? And thank you, Jeff Youngquist, for this wonderful question.
Well, certainly Laura Bush stands out in that department. She won a big National Garden Club award just recently. but she's active in the Dallas Garden Club. She comes to the Garden Club meetings. Of course, she has a security with her, but everybody knows her. She's been doing it for years. And when I speak to the Garden Club, there she is in the front row. So it's always a little intimidating if I'm talking about first ladies, and there is a first lady in the front row.
That's great. That's great. She's engaged, right? She's engaged.
Oh, yeah. She knows all the botanical names. And this is, there's her house with the botanical prints. I mean, she knows her stuff. She designed her presidential library gardens and all.
That's great. I just love that. What a wonderful picture, too. So we have some other questions that are popping up, too, here. We see Jennifer Taylor has a question. Great discussion. Art, what might it take to get women wearing Cattleya orchids again today?
Well, you can no longer import the Cattleyas from South America the way they did in the turn of the century. So they would have to be all raised in the United States from seed or clone. But I don't see why the fashion couldn't come back. I mean, fashion is cyclical. I mean, here's Mamie Eisenhower. She's just dripping with Cattleyas, and so are all her friends. It's almost like a play date. It's dress up, and they're having the time of their lives. And fashion really is cyclical. I mean, we're seeing bell bottoms today. You got to be kidding. Who would ever wear bell bottoms again? Or turntables? That would be the last thing I would do, is rush out to get a record. All the scratches. CDs made those obsolete, I thought, but apparently not. So why couldn't Cattleyas come back as corsages?
Absolutely. I think we should start it right here, Art. It begins right here with you and me and Jennifer. I think it's fabulous. It should come back.
Yes.
So we have another question here. Thank you for this wonderful program. Do you know, and thank you, thanks for tuning in. Do you know if White House florists decorate the White House with Cattleya orchids? Great question. Speech teacher from Pennsylvania.
Excellent question. Yes, I've gotten to know the White House florists. They do put orchids all around. Cattleyas are not all that long lasting. They tend to go for flowers that last long as cuts. Dendrobiums, cymbidiums, they last, a month or two cut. Phalaenopsis lasts 3 months. They don't even seem real sometimes because they just last forever. So Cattleyas are a little short-lived in that. They only last 3 or 4 days when they're cut. And the plant, maybe a month, but you have to really know what you're doing and bring it in fresh, water it once a week, give it a nice bright room. So we don't see them too much at the White House as potted plants or cut flowers, but I hope to change that.
Yes, great. So we do have time for 1 or 2 more questions. So if you'd like to pop those into the chat, we'd be more than happy to get to them. Marna Neiman has said she really enjoyed that photo of Joe Biden in her namesake Cattleyas. And I would say, Marna Neiman, if you like that photo, you're going to love this book, and everyone should go out and grab it. It's just so great.
Can I tell you about this Kennedy picture here for a second?
Oh, yeah, I'd love it. Please do.
So this hybrid was made in 1961 by Patterson Orchids in New Jersey, enormous cut flower operation. They're no longer in business, but they first made this beautiful semi-alba, white with a purple throat, and they had thousands upon thousands of these plants that they grew for cut flowers. And Mrs. Kennedy was only 31 when she entered the White House, very young. She wasn't about to wear those orchid corsages that the older women wore. So instead, she wore what's called a pocketbook corsage. She sort of invented this. She would attach a corsage to her pocketbook so she could walk in with it. She'd have all the glamour of the orchid, but she could put it down and mingle and chat and dance and then pick it back up again and be glamorous again. And so once the American public saw this pocketbook corsage, suddenly everybody wanted to wear one.
That's great. This is such interesting history. Like, who knows this? Art Chadwick.
It's a little niche.
So Jeff Youngquist has another question for us. He says, have you created a namesake orchid for Melania Trump? And will you create a second one for her because she's a first lady again? Right.
So we named a stunning art shade. They call this art shades, reds, oranges, during her husband's first term. And we presented it to her, and she wrote me this lovely thank you letter. There was a picture taken, but she did not release the picture. And I'm just dying to get a hold of that picture because, it really says a lot about the legacy of the first ladies and their love for orchids. But anytime there's a second term or third term, you only get that one opportunity to have a namesake orchid. Now, I just happen to have an award certificate from the American Orchid Society of one of the Melania Trump hybrids. And so we've had several awards for their flower quality. That's how good the flower is. It's round and flat and colorful. And you get this fancy certificate. And that becomes another part of the legacy of the First Ladies.
I love that. You know, I loved all your orchids, but I have to admit that I thought that the one from Melania Trump was my favorite. And maybe it's just because I have a preference for those, the color, right?
It's very exotic, yes.
Oh, yeah. It's just so beautiful. And I noted that it received the highly commended certificate from the American Orchid Society.
That's right.
Laura Bush also the Award of Merit.
There it is. Yep.
Yeah. Wonderful. I just love it. I really appreciate that your work gets some recognition, because the work that you do is really important, and it's very meaningful, and it contributes to the beauty of our world. I think people underestimate how much nature and flowers in particular contribute to our well-being.
And getting the American Orchid Society to stamp an approval on a hybrid is significant, because you have these well-trained judges that have 10, 20, 30 years experience, and they look at the lineage of the hybrid. They compare it to its parents, grandparents, great-parents. Is it better than the previous generation? They're measuring petals down to the centimeters. They're looking at the presentation and the color and the fragrance, and all these factors they take into consideration. And then it has to be voted on. And so if you pass all these barriers and get an award, it's really significant.
Oh yeah, I bet. I can only imagine. And that's why you are so well positioned to provide a column to provide orchid advice. You've done that for 20 years. Are you still doing that?
Well, you know, newspapers, they sort of got rid of their local content recently.
Yeah.
And away I went, which is a pity, because the public wants to know about these orchid issues. And for 20 years, I had an orchid advice column in many of the papers in the Southeast.
I think that's wonderful. I'm glad that you did. And it's unfortunate. It really is a loss. Just think about all those orchids that are going to perish under those 3 ice cubes. And further. And honestly, they're challenging. They are challenging. Like even the basic Phalaenopsis that you get from the grocery store, which is destined, like it's meant not to fail. Like,
right.
But we still managed to make that happen.
Well, yes.
The more intricate orchids like the Cattleyas that require so much more care.
Let me show you something else here. My mother was a botanical artist.
Oh wow. Oh,
and she painted many of my father's hybrids as they bloomed. This is all done in watercolor. And then she framed them, and they're for posterity. And she was you look at it and say, this is a real rendition of a flower. And so these adorn our house and our stores, all these orchid paintings, not just from my mother, but other artists of the time.
Wow, that's magnificent. It truly is. It's just beautiful. Just your family has so many contributions. And I hope that all of these elements that you've got make it somehow into some kind of archive, or Library of Congress. Is this book in the Library of Congress? Yeah. We'll make sure it gets there.
Well, while we're talking about history, let me show you another print. This one's from the 1800s. This is a Reichenbachia print, a print from the 1890s of the first species that were discovered in the jungles.
Oh, wow.
And they were sent to Kew Gardens and bloomed and then painted. And you wouldn't believe what a book of these costs today. We had one on exhibit at the Chelsea Flower Show. They sell for $55,000 on eBay for a book of these prints. But many people just tore the pages out and framed them individually because they were so unbelievable. And we actually have a few of them, and they're just a living legacy of the early days of Cattleyas.
Oh, that's phenomenal. That's really great. So the First Ladies, if you can handle a couple more questions, the First Lady for Research and Education says, can you speak about Lady Bird Johnson's orchid? Would you mind telling us a little bit about that?
Well, she was known for her wildflowers. I mean, all the wildflowers on the highways in all 50 states are because of her program she launched in the 50s and or the 60s, I guess it was. And so forevermore, she's known for her wildflowers. And at the Presidential Library, she's got her gardens and And yet she did not have an orchid named after her. It just seemed, crazy. The men always got the glory. And so this is also one that we retroactively named after her. And she has 2 surviving children. And one is located in Virginia. And we drove up and presented it on Mother's Day.
Oh,
and you can imagine how she was thrilled with that.
That's fantastic. Jeff Youngquist says, this is a wonderful tradition, Art, and I totally agree. And so much fun. Is there anything or anyone that will help continue this tradition with the same enthusiasm as you when you're no longer doing it?
So if I get hit by a bus tomorrow, who's going to run with this project? Is that what you're saying? Well, my father did it till he was 90. I'm only 62. So unless I am hit by a bus, I've got, maybe 30 years to go. Now I have 2 kids. One's an aerospace engineer and one's a nutritionalist. Neither one are really all that interested in orchids. Young people today, they don't want to get their hands dirty. However, they have helped a great deal with social media and marketing and automation with the greenhouse. And they're involved in their own way. And they were invaluable at the Chelsea Flower Show. So I'm hoping one of us, picks up the stick, comes running home and runs with the orchid project.
Oh, well, what I would say, Art, is make sure you look both ways before you walk the street. And also, it's possible that they could pick it up just like you did.
Absolutely. I
yeah.
quit my electrical engineering job cold turkey at age 25 and went headlong into horticulture, lived it and breathed it without a single horticulture class. I'm still not sure what photosynthesis is, but having lived orchids 24 hours a day for 35 years, I feel like I have it down pretty well, but I'm still learning new stuff every day.
Yes. And the thing about gardening itself is it actually contributes to our longevity. A lot of times people don't realize this, that there are blue zones around the world where people live to be in advanced age without the kind of diseases that we see in the Western world. And there's many things that contribute to that, but one element is gardening. And the fact that your dad lived to be 90 speaks to that. It's something that feeds the soul and it feeds the body and the brain as well.
Let me tell you a little story about that. He lived to be 90. He lived at his house in Wilmington, Delaware, with 2 greenhouses attached to his house. And he couldn't wait to get up in the morning to go out to the greenhouse and see what was in bloom that day. And honestly, that kept him going. It was just such a thrill for him to see these flowers in bloom. He'd watch them year after year for 50 years bloom. And his own hybrids that he'd created, seeing them for the first time, blooming after 7 years for the very first time, never before seen the light of day until right there. And he got to see it. And I really think that kept him going into his 90s.
Absolutely. That story feeds my heart. My dad is the same way. He'll be 94 in July. He built his own little greenhouse, and each day he wakes up and looks forward to seeing what's in bloom. Yep.
How about that?
Yep. And he plans out his garden the year before. Sends me, articles and things for me to take into consideration with my own. So I truly believe that this gardening, it does so much for us in so many ways.
Yes. If you have a headache, just go out to your garden and it'll be gone in 10 minutes.
100%. So maybe just 2 more questions for you. We're kind of pummeling you with questions, but you're so great.
Bring it on. Bring it on.
You're phenomenal. Okay. Are there any First Lady orchids that are no longer in cultivation?
Well, that is a sad thing. Pat Nixon's is one of them. Even though it was wildly popular in the 60s, there are no surviving plants of that today. I've run ads in horticulture magazines, newspapers, anywhere. Has anybody heard of this orchid? And there are none in circulation. So I had to go back and find the parents that made this hybrid. So I bought the parents and I cross-pollinated them. I waited 7 years and they're blooming again. So this one has been reintroduced. I've got lots of little babies that are coming along. But that's a true passion. To remake a hybrid that's been missing and out of circulation is quite a feat because now everyone can have one.
Oh, that's remarkable. That's just wonderful to resurrect something that has disappeared. Truly.
Yes.
Great. Now, is there any place, like let's say we wanted to go see the First Lady orchids in person, everyone must be so enthusiastic now after we've had this discussion. Where can people go to see them in person?
There's currently two places, two public gardens. The Smithsonian Gardens, when they bloom, they pair them with the First Lady dresses. And Longwood Gardens in Kennett Square, Pennsylvania, recently acquired the entire collection. So when they bloom, they put them in their orchid room. Now, they're not going to be featured, with spotlights and all that. You'll see them amongst the others that are in bloom, but they're there if you look hard.
Oh, that's great. Everyone should be making their plans to visit. Yes. And can you tell us a little bit about this picture here?
Yes. So Michelle Obama's orchid, this is a hybrid I made. And what's particularly noteworthy about this is one of the parents is a species that lasts for 6 weeks in the wild. And lo and behold, the children all last for 6 weeks in bloom as well. So gosh, that's what we hybridizers want, is a flower that's long lasting. 6 weeks. I mean, we're up against Phalaenopsis, which seem to last forever. They might even be plastic. So anytime you see a long lasting Cattleya, that's a wonderful trait. And so this is a hybrid. I'm presenting it to her. I had a big plant that I was going to show to her, and she was giving a talk in Norfolk, Virginia. And her security detail didn't have their bomb sniffing equipment with them, so they wouldn't allow the big specimen orchid into the room with her because, there could be a bomb in the orchid. Boy, wouldn't that be great PR for me? So I had to beg the security guy, could I just pick off a few flowers and show her? And he reluctantly agreed to let me pick off a few flowers. So I walked in with these few flowers, and I had the certificate of authenticity from the Royal Horticulture Society that says what it is. I wasn't just making it up. So I walked in and she said, gee, what is it? I said, well, see that plant way over there? It's part of that.
It must have hurt to have to pull the flowers off of your plant.
It really, yes.
But you're dedicated to showing them the beauty and helping them understand what you've created. Well, you've been so generous with us tonight with your wisdom, with your creativity, and sharing all of the great things that you've done. Is there anything that you'd like to share with us before I kind of close things out? Absolutely.
We have 3 locations in Richmond, Virginia, our greenhouses and 2 retail stores. And everybody seems to drive down I-95 for one reason or another, going up to New York, down to Florida, wherever. And I would hope anyone and everyone who hears this can stop by our nursery and see what's going on. They could see the First Lady orchids, or just the vast expansiveness of what a greenhouse operation looks like that's full of orchids.
And where are those 3 locations? Or they can probably Google it on your website?
2 retail stores in the city of Richmond, and our greenhouses are just half an hour west in Powhatan County.
Fantastic. Well, I want to thank you so much for this wonderful discussion, Art. Your expertise, your enthusiasm, they've brought a fresh perspective to our discussion of First Ladies, as well as orchids. And as we reflect on this evening's dialogue, I really hope it inspires continued curiosity and exploration about our First Ladies as well as orchids. And I would say, you know what? You don't have to be an expert in First Ladies to have an interest in them. There are countless pathways to get to them, like we've learned about tonight. Thank you so much, Art. It's just been a pleasure.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And I'll turn this back to you, Nancy.
I would just like to say this was a fantastic program, and having just done a talk on Dolly at Montpelier with my friend Diana Carlin, I would say that Art is the Dolly Madison of orchids. There's a saying about Dolly, everybody loved Dolly, and Dolly loved everybody. And everybody loves orchids. And orchids, however, do not love everybody. And I'm very embarrassed to say that this little guy had 2 ice cubes on it yesterday. So I now know. But it has been a wonderful program. I encourage anybody who is watching, who is not a FLAIR member, a member of the First Ladies Association of Research and Education, to please join FLAIR. Go to flair-net.org. we have this fulsome programming and events, and we would love to have you part of our wonderful family. And I want to thank Valerie and Art for the most engaging program. And I am very glad my orchid is still alive. So thank you all, and good night.
Okay.